It was supposed to be routine. Just another congressional hearing. Another long day filled with prepared statements, rehearsed answers, and cameras quietly documenting political theater. Most people expected the usual pattern: questions asked, answers carefully avoided, and everyone leaving the room believing nothing truly important had happened. But that is not how this day unfolded. Because the moment Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett leaned forward in her chair, something shifted. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just enough to make the air in the room feel heavier. The energy changed in a way people could sense before a single word was spoken. Across from her sat Chairman James Comer, confident, composed, and completely comfortable in his position. For months, he had controlled the narrative. He held the gavel. He controlled the pace. And from the outside, it looked like he controlled the outcome. At least, that's what most people believed. What happened next caught nearly everyone off guard. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't interrupt. She didn't perform for headlines or cameras. Instead, she did something far more dangerous in Washington. She came prepared. Not with slogans or talking points, but with timelines, public records, and carefully documented facts. And she delivered them with the calm precision of someone who already knew exactly where the conversation was heading. Her first question sounded harmless. Polite. Controlled. The kind of question heard thousands of times in congressional hearings. Chairman Comer nodded confidently, ready to respond, clearly expecting to guide the conversation wherever he wanted. But Crockett wasn't asking a question to hear him talk. She was building a framework. With each sentence, she narrowed the space for vague answers. With every follow-up, she removed another layer of flexibility. Slowly, almost invisibly, the narrative Comer had been promoting began to unravel right in front of the room. This wasn't about political party lines. It wasn't about scoring sound bites. It was about facts that had been overlooked, selectively presented, or conveniently ignored. The room grew quiet not out of boredom, but because people were listening closely. Comer attempted to pivot, leaning on familiar language about investigations, concerns, and oversight. It was a strategy that usually worked. Many officials rely on broad language to create authority without providing specifics. But Crockett didn't let it slide. She waited for him to finish speaking. Then she calmly introduced one detail that changed the entire tone of the hearing. A date. Just one date. She referenced when a major claim had first been publicly made. Then she referenced when actual supporting evidence surfaced. And then she asked a simple question. How could both timelines be accurate? Comer hesitated. It wasn't long. Just long enough for cameras to capture it. Long enough for viewers to feel the silence stretch across the room. He answered, but the confidence had shifted. His words sounded rehearsed in a way that suddenly felt disconnected from the moment. Crockett didn't react emotionally. She simply continued. She referenced public documents, records anyone could verify, and pointed out how those records contradicted public messaging that had dominated headlines for months. At that point, the hearing stopped feeling like a debate. It became a real-time fact check. Every time Comer broadened the discussion, Crockett narrowed it again. Every time he spoke in general terms, she responded with precise details: names, timelines, and documented actions. The tension inside the hearing room deepened. Even observers with no political alignment leaned forward, recognizing that something unusual was happening. Then Crockett delivered the line that shifted everything further. She asked why certain verified facts had never appeared in public statements. Why press conferences highlighted accusations but ignored contradictory evidence? Why claims traveled faster than proof? She never accused him directly of dishonesty. She didn't have to. The implication filled the silence between her words. Comer attempted to regain control by expanding his responses, repeating points that had already been challenged. But with each repetition, his position felt weaker. What made the exchange so powerful was Crockett's restraint. She remained calm, steady, almost surgical in her delivery. She wasn't trying to dominate the conversation, she was dismantling it piece by piece. Viewers noticed immediately. Clips began spreading online. Not because of shouting or confrontation, but because of something rare, a public official demonstrating preparation and discipline rather than performance. But Crockett wasn't finished. She introduced a new layer by referencing Comer's own previous public statements that directly conflicted with his testimony during the hearing. She read his exact words back to him. Verbatim. The contradiction was undeniable. Comer tried to explain the discrepancy using context and interpretation, but the explanation struggled to close the gap between past statements and current claims. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument could have been. At that moment, the hearing transformed. This was no longer about disagreement. It was about credibility. Crockett then widened the conversation beyond one investigation. She began discussing priorities, how time, energy, and taxpayer resources had been directed toward claims that repeatedly struggled to meet basic verification standards. She asked what had actually been proven so far, not suggested, not speculated, but proven. The response that followed was lengthy but lacked clarity. It leaned heavily on intentions rather than outcomes. That's when Crockett delivered another defining line. She stated that oversight without accuracy is not accountability, it is theater. The room reacted quietly, but noticeably, because the statement reframed the entire hearing. Suddenly, the discussion wasn't about political victory. It was about responsibility to the public. Comer insisted the investigation was ongoing and that answers would come with time. Crockett pulled the conversation back to the present. She asked why public accusations were being presented with certainty if the investigation itself remained incomplete. There was no easy answer to that question. Comer spoke about transparency and public interest. Crockett acknowledged those principles, then asked why transparency seemed to disappear when facts complicated the narrative. Murmurs moved across the room. Crockett began listing examples where testimony, documents, or clarifications had been excluded from public messaging. She didn't present them as accusations. She presented them as omissions. And omissions, she argued, shape narratives just as powerfully as false statements. Comer's responses became shorter and more guarded. He shifted toward defending his integrity and intentions. Crockett listened respectfully, then reminded him that intentions do not erase outcomes. That line resonated deeply because it expanded the discussion beyond one individual and into institutional responsibility. She explained how selective presentation of facts damages public trust. How credibility, once weakened, is extremely difficult to rebuild. For a brief moment, cameras captured uncertainty on Comer's face, not anger, not frustration, but hesitation. Crockett then moved into territory few expected. She spoke about patterns where allegations gained widespread attention while corrections received little coverage, if any at all. She emphasized that first impressions often shape public opinion permanently, even if later proven inaccurate. Comer insisted the work was necessary and that difficult questions must be asked. Crockett agreed. Then she responded with another defining statement. Difficult questions require honest answers, and honesty begins with acknowledging uncertainty. That moment crystallized the entire exchange. Because uncertainty had been largely absent from the public narrative surrounding the investigation, Crockett did not demand apologies. She did not demand retractions. She asked for responsibility, specifically, whether public messaging would match the caution displayed under scrutiny. Comer responded carefully, stating he would continue his work. Crockett nodded and said she hoped that work would protect truth as strongly as it pursued it. As the exchange came to a close, the power dynamic inside the hearing room had completely shifted. This was no longer a discussion about allegations. It was a discussion about credibility. When the gavel finally struck and the hearing ended, the moment did not fade. It followed everyone out of the room and directly into the national conversation. Clips spread rapidly online, not clips filled with shouting or chaos, but moments of silence, pauses where answers struggled to form, moments where facts replaced rhetoric. Commentators replayed the exchange repeatedly, not because it was dramatic in a traditional sense, but because it felt authentic. Crockett had not attacked her colleague personally. She had exposed the distance between claims and verified evidence. Public reactions focused less on political winners and losers and more on accountability, accuracy, and leadership responsibility. Meanwhile, Comer continued his role, issuing statements and defending the investigation. But something had changed. The certainty was gone. And once certainty cracks publicly, it never fully returns. Every future claim becomes measured against the moment that exposed its weaknesses. That is the lasting impact of accountability. The hearing became a reference point, a reminder that oversight is not about volume or visibility. It is about accuracy, patience, and discipline. Jasmine Crockett demonstrated that power does not always look loud or dominant. Sometimes it looks like preparation. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like asking one precise question and allowing silence to reveal the answer. Because democracy does not collapse overnight. It erodes slowly through exaggeration, shortcuts, and narratives that outrun facts. What happened in that hearing slowed that erosion, even if only briefly. It reminded viewers that accountability still matters, that power still carries responsibility, and that facts remain stronger than performance. And that is why people are still talking about it. Not because it was explosive, but because it was real.